Hey, welcome to the locker room. Quick announcement before we jump in with our conversation with Karl is we have an awesome elective starting this Sunday called The Case for Life in a Post-Roe Age. And it's led by Jim Sprague. He's the CEO of PRC, which is Pregnancy Resource Centers. He's a Crossroads guy. Him and his family are just wonderful, and God has just done an amazing work in that. And if you think that this class is just going to be about being pro-life in the sense of being anti-abortion, it is so much more than that. It is about being people who are shaped by a God who is for life, period. So that's the lives of mothers, that's the lives of the children, that's the lives of the orphan, that's the lives of black, white, Asian, doesn't matter who you are, what color you are, how old you are, God is for life. And so what does that look like, and how do we live into that as a community?
Jim was on the earlier podcast as well. Excellent.
Yeah, so sign up at crossroads-bible.org. It's right on our main ticker. So
enjoy the conversation.
You know what?
All
the Greek words are just basic words.
So we were talking about where the term lay person, because Karl was asking.
Lay person or laity. Yeah.
And then I asked what?
It's a Greek word that means people.
Okay. But yes, we have had plenty of people that simply attend Crossroads and are living out their kingdom dreams, and you are too, Karl.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about Taproot Pictures.
Yeah. So Taproot Pictures is a commercial film production company. I started it, I started in 2006, kind of part-time, and then went full-time. I went full-time in 2006. That's right. Started in 2003, I guess, part-time. And we do a lot of, marketing-related work. We do TV commercials. We've done a lot of doc-style storytelling type of stuff. I think storytelling is kind of what we're known for, what I'm passionate about. And, we do that all across the country.
I love it.
Yeah.
And how long have you, tell us about your connection to Crossroads. How'd you guys end up here? And
kind of funny story. We moved to Traverse City. I moved from Traverse City to Grand Rapids in 2007, and I went for me to go to film school. Came down here for me to go to film school, and attended a church in the area for a while. And eventually, there were some changes that happened, and we were really kind of floundering. Because I felt like I had been kind of exposed to some things, just in how Scripture had been approached differently from what I was exposed to when I was in my youth. Just a lot of the cultural, contextual stuff. I think that happens at Crossroads, and I just didn't feel like we were going to find anywhere, in town. They just weren't doing that. I just feel like that was not. It's more prevalent now, I guess, but it wasn't then. And so we tried some different places, and we're really struggling. And my wife literally Googled and found Crossroads and listened to a podcast. Or I guess it wasn't a podcast at that time.
Sermon.
It was a sermon, yeah, online. And it was Rod. and she said, I think you got to listen to this guy. And I think you might like him. And I remember we were driving up north on a trip, and we listened. I was like, I don't know, he's pretty fiery. I don't know. He's kind of
I am.
And but I said, but it's pretty interesting. And we listened, a couple more, and then finally attended. And the rest is history. We've been here ever since.
How long?
It's been about 7 years now.
Wow.
Praise God.
Yeah. It's been
So
awesome.
part of the storytelling that Karl does, people who have been around Grand Rapids for a while are familiar with Calvary Church, and he did a documentary on Ed Dobson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, coming right out of film school. Got connected to Ed. And Ed, a lot of people know him, obviously, but had ALS and had it for quite some time. I ended up having it for about 15 years. And we ended up creating a film series, producing that. And got some distribution and got a lot of recognition, but it was a really great piece to kind of be involved with.
Yeah, it was phenomenal.
Yeah.
I'll say this about ALS. It's probably my biggest fear. In fact, if I'm really honest, because I do a little working out, there's times when I feel like, and Libby will tell me, I'm a head case, where my hands feel like I'm losing muscle in my feet. And I said this to my brother, and I said, Kurt, I'm just kind of concerned about this. He goes, Rod, I've been checked out 3 times.
He's concerned too. I mean,
but anyway, I mean, to think that that's something that Ed walked through, and he was a big testimony. I'm just so glad that you captured that.
Yeah. And your primary work for, generating business for Taproot, and then also income for your family and the families that work for you, is commercial. But I've even looked at your commercial work, whether it's working with Chevy, whatever. You love and thrive in not just marketing things, but creating story. And it's just reminded me about how we were created for story, and how much fun I've been having just sitting back for this ride through Genesis, and how amazing this story is.
Yeah.
I mean, this family that we've been introduced to since chapter 12 is a mess, yes, but I find myself in each one of these characters in so many ways. And we're going to be recapping both Genesis 28 and 29 today. And 28 is really the story of Jacob fleeing from his brother Esau. And they've obviously had a very interesting relationship, we might call it. And so Jacob deceives his father, and now he's alone in the wilderness. And then he gets this dream. And the scene is crazy to me, because Jacob's utterly alone. I would imagine he's not very happy with the state of his life right now. He has a rock for a pillow. And at this place, God shows up. And Rod, well, you mentioned it this last week, but Nate also kind of dived into it. Can you tell us a little bit about this Hebrew word for the place that Jacob finds himself in, and why that's so significant?
Yeah. So, I mean, it starts off, Jacob left Beersheba, set out for Haran. So he's leaving the promised land. And when he reached a certain place, our text says, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. And there's so much going on just in that one verse. And if you don't mind, I just even want to start with that literary where it talks about the sun had set. That's just the Bible's way of not just saying physically the sun was setting, but it's saying the sun is setting on Jacob's life. I mean, his life is going dark. He has made a mess of it, a train wreck. He has to flee his brother who wants to kill him. His parents, the promised land, all of it. And it just looks like it's over. And the sun is setting on his life. But it says he reached a certain place. And that just doesn't jump out at us in English. In Hebrew, it's ha-makom. And that first shows up in Genesis chapter 22 several times in that story of Abraham taking Isaac up the hill. And over the text says, to a certain place, to ha-makom. And so ha-makom is not just a certain place or even a very special place. It's the place. It's the place where heaven and earth meet. Heaven is God's space. Earth is our space. And that's what the ancients were all looking for. Like every holy place to an ancient was considered the place where heaven and earth meet, where heaven meets earth. And so to go to a temple was not just to go to a place of worship. It was literally to enter back into heaven, the place where heaven met earth. And I just love it because Jacob is probably at the worst place in his life and thinking it's all just a mess and there's no hope. And then he doesn't even know it, but he stumbles upon the place where heaven and earth meet.
Have you guys found that in your own story too? Because this story really ministered to me in that I feel maybe this is just experientially or the way that God works, and he's confirming it here in Genesis chapter 28, that when we're brought to the end of ourselves in the places of desperation, where everything has been stripped away, oftentimes that is where God does his best work in our lives.
I mean, that's from cover to cover in our Bible.
Yeah.
That metaphor. I mean, God's power is made perfect in our weakness. The whole concept of desert, and desert is a place of barrenness, but that's God's holy of holies, biblically. And like, God just shouts that at us through his narrative, that the desert is his special place where he is present in such special ways. And yeah, so therefore I think in our lives, when our lives become desert, when our lives become a train wreck, we have opportunities to experience what the psalmist said, that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. And that's just God's heart.
And let us not forget that the reason that he's in this place of desperation where his life has become a train wreck, it's not because external circumstances came in. He did this to himself.
He's not a victim.
He's not a victim.
No, he's not. He's a perpetrator.
Which shows God's grace.
Yeah.
God comes to him after he does this to his own life.
Yes.
Which, doesn't that give you hope? Like, I don't know. That gives me a lot of hope that God is sovereignly working out his plans and purposes in my life, despite how faithful or unfaithful I am to those plans.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're seeing in this family. You know, as the text has the big story, but then the little stories, the micro stories, you know, of Abraham and then Abraham's family. And we look at these characters, and this is where the Bible, I think, is different than any other piece of literature. When other pieces of literature, when it's trying to highlight someone and the good thing that's going to happen through them, they're always almost heroic characters, you know, just and morally upright, and there's a perfection attached to them. And yet these characters are, although they have faith, they're on a journey, and you see that they're broken, and the family's broken, and the family that God is working through is messed up. And I don't know, I think this is real to life, though.
Yeah, and that story is powerful. So I'd just be interested in speaking of that, because Rod was just talking about how there's kind of two stories being layered. You have the cosmic, the macro level story that's happening, and then we get these little micro stories. And we've talked about this a little bit, like your approach to even the work that you do is about creating story, obviously for brands, but when you express that to the people that you're working with, how do you explain to them the power of story, and why are you so convinced that story is actually the best way to connect with the human heart?
Yeah, I think we're hardwired for it, you know, first off. And I think that, you know, story allows us the freedom to find ourselves in it. And I think it is really such a mechanism for growth and learning, right? Sometimes we can resist, you know, being told how to do something, or this is, you know, what something means, but a story leaves room for interpretation. People key in on different, you know, parts that stand out to them. And, yeah, to me, that's the spirit at work, I guess, through all that. And I think when you feel like you come to a realization yourself, you know, then you're more open to change.
Yeah.
As opposed to having, again, kind of forced on you.
Just have propositions thrown your way.
Yeah. It's
very true. I mean, Libby will tell me this even when I watch a movie. Like, for some reason, I get so caught up in it. Because the story literally invites you into it.
Yeah.
And my mind then begins to imagine, like, what if I was this character, or am I like this character? And how would I respond in this situation? And I think this is too why Jesus, you know, so much of his teaching is in story. Just like what you said, Karl, you start to find your place in it. Like, am I this person? Am I that person? You know, am I the guy in the ditch?
Yeah, usually identifying with somebody, right?
Yeah. Or am I the guy that's passing by the guy in the ditch? And I have these 5 reasons why I'm passing by the guy in the ditch. Am I the person that's helping the person in the ditch? Like, so that's what a story does, as opposed to propositions. And I'm not against propositions,
No.
but story just, I think, connects to our heart.
So let me ask you this. I think I am a guy that kind of grew up like, tell me what this means, right? It's kind of funny that I'm in the business I am, because you have to leave things a little bit more open sometimes. But even my church background was pretty literal and very legalistic. And
Just tell me what I got to know.
yeah, tell me how it works. Set me up, I'll knock it down, I'll do it, kind of thing. And I want to get it right.
Tell me what I need to know, what I need to do, and then I'll go do it.
Yep. And I don't think that's really what God wants, right? Is us getting it right. He wants us, I guess is how I think about it now. But so even like when we were reading this passage here, you talked about the sun had set, and I remember you saying this, on Sunday, like that's, and again, that's the Bible's way of, saying a lot more than just, hey, the sun's going down, it's setting on Jacob's life. And a lot of times because I'll dive into this stuff too, and I don't know Hebrew or Greek, but I will, use the tools and look stuff up and try to figure out where are you getting that from? Is that just through understanding the language of Scripture? Is that just reading into the narrative? I mean, it's kind of exegesis, I guess, right? I mean, but how do you think about that?
Well, I mean, there's a title. I think it's Alders, the author of this book. The title of the book is simply How to Read a Book. And there's a way to read a book. There's a way to read a story. And I used to read the Bible as a Westerner with a Western lens, which Western understanding is propositions, definitions, point, subpoint, subpoint, point, subpoint, subpoint. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's a great way of arriving at meaning and truth. I mean, that's much how Paul writes his letters.
Yeah.
But the Bible is more than the letters of Paul. But this is part of the reason why the Western mind gravitates to Paul's letters, is because they're written to a Greek, a Westerner, in a way that Westerners formulate ideas. But when I was introduced to this idea of the way a Middle Easterner thinks, which is more in pictures and images and through narrative and story, all of a sudden, as I started to try to put those lenses on and take off my Western lenses, I was just blown away at all the things in my Bible that I had never seen before that just started to pop. And it's not like it confronted or conflicted with the propositions of Paul.
You didn't have to totally reinterpret the Bible.
No, I did not have to reinterpret the Bible, but like all of a sudden maybe the 2D became 3D or the black and white became full of color, and it just became a joy to read. And then also I feel like it went just from my mind more into my heart, because when you see that the sun had set on Jacob's life, and that the Bible is telling us that, one, it's not hard to imagine, but then I can just put myself in Jacob's shoes. And if I had done that to my brother, and my parents were pushing me out of the family and telling me to flee, like, that would feel like a very dark night of my soul. Okay? And then Jacob is going to be on this journey from this point all the way until, and he's still in this journey of wrestle and struggle and being a broken man with a broken heart that needs healing. And that healing is going to finally come when he wrestles with that stranger in Genesis 32. And this is going to be that moment where God's going to touch him and change his name, which also means a change in identity and purpose. And then the next verse is, and the sun rose as Jacob limped. And so that's the bookend of the sun setting to that point where the sun now is rising on Jacob's life. and can't wait to get to that part. But
Yeah, which, by the way, just PSA, that will be the beginning of the second half of Genesis. That's where we're starting. So it'll be good. We're stopping right before the end of the Jacob narrative, and it'll be fun.
And then when you actually get yourself into the story and you can relate to the dark night of the soul aspect of the story, it's so encouraging to think this is a God who, yes, has us on a journey for a reason, and with the sun setting on our lives for a reason, but there's going to come that moment when God is going to touch us and change us and break us, and the sun is going to rise. And I don't know, I need that hope. I love that hope. That's the hope of the Bible.
Exactly. And that kind of goes back to your point where, when we read Genesis, it shows us that our life of faith is a journey, and it's not just about, knowing the right things and then doing the right things, but it's about relationship, that God is journeying with these people. And despite their failures, he's promised that he's going to be with them. And so then he is. And I think that's reassuring for me too, because I think my faith is constantly like, God, are you there? Like, did I do something bad enough this time to lose your presence? And I'm looking at this story, and just over and over and over again, God is faithful. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not dealing with earthly consequences to their sin. Jacob finds himself with a rock for a pillow because of his sin. However, with the rock comes the dream. Yeah. And then we get this dream of, obviously, this stairway. And, can we talk about the significance of what's up with this? Why is he getting a dream of a stairway? Mm-hmm. I don't know. So what do you think about when you first,
So, I've heard some people say, was this like a ziggurat, kind of dream kind of thing?
Yeah.
And I guess I think about functionally, maybe whether it was or wasn't, it kind of serves the same thing. Kind of what you were talking about earlier about heaven and earth, connecting.
That's what a ziggurat was, though, by the way. It was just that. It was a stairway to heaven.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, do you think that this story is where Led Zeppelin got their inspiration for that song?
Probably. Yeah.
I don't know.
The ancient always saw the Hamachom as, or the axis mundi, the place where heaven and earth meet. It was always either a great mountain or a temple that went way up in the air, like Babel.
Yeah.
Or a great tree. It's throughout, all the ancient religions. But even Jesus in the New Testament, when it says he prayed, it almost always says, and he went up to pray. There's just this idea that you go up to God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and you think about, so now theologically or even psychologically, how I think about how I must relate to God, it's doing these things in my life that are essentially, figuratively, me ascending so that I could be in God's presence. Mm-hmm. But here, the biblical pattern is now that God comes down, God comes down, God comes down. And the same thing happens here.
Yeah, God's coming from heaven to earth. The angels are ascending and descending.
Yeah.
And the way the text reads is that, and the Lord stood over Jacob. So just, if you can envision that, the Lord stood over Jacob, because I always read this as a kid and just thought God was way up at the top of the ladder. But the Lord actually comes down the ladder and stands over Jacob. And he's just near. This God that is so beyond us and so far away in character, in holiness. And yet here he comes, he draws near. It's just amazing. Mm-hmm. This is the God of the Bible. Yeah. He comes down.
Can you think
we just don't naturally think like that?
No.
Right. That's the thing that I'm constantly challenged with, like you were saying, Tryg, like what have I done something too bad this time, right? And that's just not what he's after.
Ask yourself this. What did Jacob do to get God to come down?
Nothing.
So this isn't even about Jacob.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes we think if we rub the genie bottle just the right way, we'll get God to come down into our lives. Or if we do enough good or pray enough prayers. Now, again, God calls us to be good. Prayer is just a blessing that we have to connect with the living God. But This is about the goodness of God, just like the whole Bible. It's not about Jacob and how good he is. Jacob's not even good right now.
Can you think about in your own life, either of you, but you more specifically, Karl, like a time like this where, there are certainly times in our life where we experientially sense a greater sense of God's presence. And for me, that is not very often, but there are those moments. And often it is the moments of suffering or desperation. And part of it is due to my own sin. Like when things are going well, it's just a lot easier for me not to think about needing him. But can you think of a moment like a dark night of the soul in your life, or I know that's pretty deep, but but where God really showed up to you in that space?
Yeah, I think there are several. It's funny as we kind of I guess it gets into the next chapter. I remember a point when I was in my 20s and I had moved away from home. I was living on the East Coast, and I had gone there because I thought this was the job I was supposed to have, and there was a relationship that I was pursuing, and I ended up quitting my job. The relationship was a mess, and ended up leaving and moving back home, and called it my quarter life crisis kind of thing. So it was a pretty dark night of the soul. It was a very long period of darkness. But I think that was the beginning of God really starting to change my path and undo a lot of the things that I had learned kind of growing up. And I just remember little things that just kept happening. Attending a church, and I was in Traverse City at this time, and somebody came and even gave a talk on worldview, biblical worldview. And I grew up in the church, I think I know what this is about, but had been living on the East Coast, and and I was working with kids that were kind of my age at the time, and I just realized how this stuff had just crept in. I was just accepting the culture.
Yeah.
And it was just, and I was kind of isolated, at the time. I was a smaller town, and I had moved from a major metro. I was living in Philadelphia, and, had family there, but no friends. And I'm like, what am I doing here? I got to get out of this place, and end up staying there, but for quite a while. And God just slowly started, unpeeling parts of my life. And I think, the stuff you talked about this past Sunday about, Jacob and looking to find himself in a relationship, that was all stuff that I had experienced, and that was part of the relationship that I was in at the time. Just was thinking this was going to be it. And after 6 months, it just fell apart. If I'm being just head over heels there's a lot of stuff here you're asking in this question, so I'm trying to give you the right level of an answer. But my parents had divorced after 35 years of marriage. I thought that was just in me. I thought I was destined to repeat that pattern, a bit of the perversion of the generational sin thing. It was this weird mix with theology, the stuff that I grew up in. And so I was desperate to try to make that relationship work. And it just from having all the feelings to one day, the faucet just turned off. I mean, I can remember when it happened, and what is wrong with me? What is going on inside? And God just slowly peeling that stuff away. It was during this time that I got exposed to some Ray Vandelon stuff, for the first time. Same thing you're talking about earlier, scales just fell off. I'm like, what in the world? Like you said, it's the same stuff, but in 3D. And for me, it literally changed the meaning of some things, right? It was it was stuff that needed to be undone. So, that was kind of start of a major change in my life. And,
so what I hear though is
incredible.
It is incredible. But
now I'm just thinking about this too. The amazing wife you have, the amazing family you have, how you guys live life on mission for the kingdom of heaven.
And I did end up meeting my wife in Traverse City, and
not all for naught.
Yeah, and it's amazing because she didn't grow up in the church really, but like the what's it, as connecto, is that the term? Like,
exactly.
I just feel like we see that in each other,
Yep.
And it's funny how she just doesn't have the baggage that I have, and just how she's challenged me, and like, this just makes sense, right? And I'm always having to process it, and try to figure it out. But God was very good. It was very hard. It was very hard.
Okay, so Karl,
when
I think about that story, and I think about your gift of storytelling, and I think about this text, and even the two bookends of the sun setting, the sun rising.
Mm-hmm.
What could you do with that?
What did I do with that?
No, what could you do with that? Like, could you, do ideas come to your mind? Like, of, how in your world with what you do, how to tease that out and then connect it to today? Like, are there possibilities there?
Besides stuff I've talked to you guys about? Like, what are you asking me here?
Are you saying like just as a creative jumpstart, where are you going with it kind of question, or what are you thinking?
I know that was a mean question actually to ask to Karl, for the simple reason that he's had kingdom dreams about this stuff. And Karl,
I mean, that was, I did. I mean, career was another thing, right? I took a career for the wrong reasons. I thought it had all the status and money and that kind of stuff. Worked for a consulting firm, and in my mind at the time, that's what I was supposed to be doing. And I just hated it. After a while, I was like, this is the worst thing imaginable. And I always wanted to do my own thing. Couldn't figure that out. And like, slowly these things started kind of falling into place. But I had given up on that dream. And I eventually actually worked at a church for a while and got involved with video production through that. And it was like the lights went off again. And that was a fanning into flame for sure. I mean, I'd been depressed, I'm like, I just don't think I'm ever going to figure this out. And then it was just this period of like, wow, I can't not get enough of this, just learning, absorbing. But I wanted to do stuff that was kingdom stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's been, I think, I'm still in that journey. I mean, I went to film school later in life in my 30s, and that's what brought us to Grand Rapids. I got involved with the Ed Story project we mentioned earlier. That's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to make stuff like that. And then had some success with that. And then some things happened with the distributor that just weren't what I thought they were going to be in terms of plans for the future. And, we've moved here with our family, and I'm like, I got to support them. And so I just got to like make money, I got to like start a business for real and get this thing going. And of course, there's lots of needs in the business world for video production. And so, I mean, there's everything we think about, like, just how we conduct ourselves in the marketplace. And, some projects we get more opportunities than others to really put a thumbprint on it. So there's been a bit of trying to like see that journey fulfilled in this commercial space. But, I think there still are kingdom dreams that I have of, doing stuff that's a little more, faith oriented, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Love that.
I want you to keep that dream alive, Karl. I've been the one that has I've been dragging my feet, and I still think God has something for us in light of what God's put on your heart. I'm external processing right now.
Okay.
Something I do a lot.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to ask, is there something we're supposed to do in light of this story, from the setting of the sun to the rising of the sun, that takes Karl's gift of storytelling and puts that story, the biblical story, with our story in some form or fashion. So I know I'm an external processor. I can't help myself. And God, what would you have for us? So could be the dumbest idea in the world.
Nah, not even close.
I'm just already thinking like we could fly out to Israel and go to these places and think it up.
Yeah, I think the world needs it, right? And there are organizations that are creating content that I think is pretty awesome. I think that they all have their niches, and the world's a big place, and I think God puts passions in people and people together, and I feel like, and I've told you guys this, like the dream that I have, I think is different than still what's out there. I think there's a place for it, and I've tried to, I feel like God has kind of forced me to be in the commercial space.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to make the best I can of this, and we're building a business and we're building a team, and, that's all happening. But I continue to just, I love studying this stuff. I went to Israel with you, and I just took copious notes, and I came back and started studying in a way I never had before. And I can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, how can I when for me, I think a lot of it was trying to figure out my own story.
Yeah.
And unpack some things, and really, what is there? I know there's something here, and I don't quite have it, kind of figured out. Not that I get to figure it out ever, but you do figure some things out. I shouldn't say it like that. But how can we share this, in an audience in a way that the world can hear it?
Yeah.
Right. Because the world is prime. You talk about all the time, right? About this exciting time, and the time we're living in is a lot like what was happening in early church. And
I feel
this is the language they're speaking right now.
About Jacob, of all the characters in the Bible, he's a 21st century man. In terms of just, he's broken, he's a manipulator, he is out for himself, he gets what he wants, he figures a way through his own strength, and yet at the end of the day, it just leads to bankruptcy and this whole dark night of the soul. Mm-hmm. And he's going to get there. God's going to do it. And to connect that story to our story, I'm just thinking of possibilities.
His stories, it's so awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and this is only the first half. Your story totally coincides with Jacob's story, because like you said, you had all of these expectations about this romantic relationship and this career, and Jacob is selling his life over for 14 years to get the woman that he so desires. And anybody who's been married knows, I mean, you made the joke, my wife's amazing, your wife's amazing, Libby's amazing, but no human being can carry the weight of those types of expectations.
Right. Correct.
Right. And we just create idol after idol after idol, and we'll do anything to get those things that we think we need to be satisfied, fulfilled, loved, accepted, appreciated. Anyway, and so isn't that this is an ancient book. How old is Genesis, Rod?
As a book? Written by Moses.
Yeah,
so it's
I'm trying to think.
About 1,500 years before Jesus. So then you add another 2,000. It's 3,500 years old. About. Yeah, it's
Is
old.
there anything more relevant to today, though? I mean, we have new technology, same problems. We have different world, but same hearts.
It's the same.
We're human beings, and
Same
human beings
messages
do
are
what
being
human
pumped
beings
into
do.
kids, right?
Yeah.
The culture is still feeding the same story, right?
Except
false gods.
Except with mediums now that put it on steroids.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, people talk about, why do we talk about social media so much? And it's social media is an amoral medium. It's just a thing. But in the hands of sinners, we can do some horrible things with it. And we just have to ask ourselves, like, how strong are we, and are we as strong as we think we are, to not be completely led astray or led into perpetual temptation by these things. Like,
I've always said similar view. It's like the technology isn't inherently bad, right? It's what we do with it. It does have addictive qualities to it, right?
Totally.
And so how strong are you? You know, how disciplined do you need to be with it?
And one of the other things too, I was just reading an article about this, about technology in general, is that we already have this tendency to want to be invincible and to make ourselves like God. I mean, this is what the story of the Tower of Babel is about. But technology, this article was talking about, and there's a secular article about how technology has given us the false idea that we can extend ourselves beyond our human limitations. And so that is actually part of the reason that has led to burnout culture, because we've become so efficient at things that as a result of that efficiency, we've just packed more and more into our lives. But human beings haven't changed. We're just as finite. We have the same limitations we did 3,500 years ago. But now we're given this powerful technology that makes us feel like we can extend ourselves way beyond what is normal or natural. We've totally obliterated the Sabbath. I hear Christians all the time, we'll obey 9 of the commandments, but not the 10th, you know, and it's like, but what's the result of these things? People are totally exhausted, totally unsatisfied. We're as wealthy of a culture that has ever existed, but we're so depressed and anxious. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, can we look at the symptoms of these things that we are using, or are they using us? I don't know. Anyway,
I also
my soapbox.
I also think people have changed a little bit. We are less mature. We're less disciplined. We're less take responsibility for our lives, and we read less. We read less of the good books. So you have a weird equation going here. You have all this technology plus immaturity, and that equals what we see in our world today. And that's a great opportunity for the church to be the church, something that's utterly distinct from the world around us, a place of refuge and life, not an island of misfit toys. But literally a community of people who are growing in health and becoming wholesome and healthy in their masculinity, femininity, wholesome and healthy in marriage, wholesome and healthy in family and in community and being the family of God. And then, wow, we'd have a lot to offer.
Yeah, contentment is a superpower.
How do you think you'd find that, Rod? That health, where does it come from?
That health comes from God and knowing God and filling our minds with this incredible story, this revelation that God has given us.
Yeah.
And letting God's story intersect with our story.
And shape us.
Yes.
That's huge.
I know.
The gospel is not just good news. It's the story that leads to the good news. And if we don't understand the story that leads to the good news, we don't understand the good news. And so to understand that, we have to understand like our limitations and our proclivity to sin and how that sin manifests itself and what it does in our life. And I mean, think about it. The story of Jacob here with Rachel is the story of how sin enslaves. Obviously, wanting a wife is a good thing, but he literally becomes essentially a slave to Laban for 14 years to get the thing that he really wants. And isn't that what sin does? And now you think about that as we correlate it back to the social media conversation. I mean, between all of the pictures of all the people's lives who have things and people and relationships and vacations that we want, now we have all of the advertisements for the things that promise to fulfill those desires in our life. And we just get on this perpetual hamster wheel of enslaving ourselves. So we buy more than we can afford, and then we become a slave to our credit card bills. We buy a house bigger than we can manage, and so then we become a slave to that house. I mean, that's why we have terms like being house poor. We become a slave to pornography, and it destroys our lives, our relationships. Like, this is what sin does. It enslaves us.
Yeah.
Not to totally point this back to my own story again, but like, I think like in light of that, like going through the thing that I did when I was in my 20s was like, what's a severe mercy is, you know, the
Severe
term that's
mercy,
used, like
yeah,
it was a grace, right? Because Rod, you talk about being desperate, you know, for Jesus. And I think one of the things that stood out to me through that period was like just how bankrupt the world's value system, the culture is in really being able to satisfy. And so there's almost like a healthy fear there, right? It's like I need to really figure out this narrative in this story, and I need to really pay attention to what God says, because it is truth. And you can get burned pretty severely if you're not. I think that provides motivation, even like when you're scrolling, right? It's like, enough of this. I can feel it, right?
Oh, you can feel it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think the way Jacob is described here, his love for Rachel, I think our culture would read that and say, "Wow, this is beautiful. This is what love is. This is love. This is what I want. How do I get to experience what Jacob gets to experience here, not knowing that it's really just self-love?" And this is where C.S. Lewis has really changed my understanding of love. I mean, he has two simple kinds of love. He says there's need love and there's give love. And he says those are radically different things. Need love is I love you because I need you. I love you because of what you do for me. I love you because you make me laugh. I love you because you make me feel good and you make me happy. That's need love. I think so much of our love today is based on need love, which is why even marriages end in divorce. Like we dispose
or listen to the vows, even on the wedding day.
Yeah.
The vows that we write. Okay, I'm going to write my vows. I love you because you do X, Y,
well,
and Z
what
for
happens when this person no longer makes you feel good or no longer makes you laugh? Or, I mean, then you dispose and you replace it with someone who will, but you really are not loving the other person. It's self-love, and that's need love. But the other love that C.S. Lewis talks about is give love. And this is the love that is the overflow of a heart that's already full. So it's not coming to your spouse, meet my needs, fill my emptiness. It's that heart is already full and it's out of the overflow. And that's the love that we see in Christ. That's the love that God calls us to. It's give love. And Jacob doesn't understand that yet. But this is...
I don't know if I do.
I know. And honestly, right?
Yeah, it's like, it doesn't just get infused in you, and
it gets confused.
It is, well, I mean, like, it's supernatural, but like,
it is.
God finds a way to like hammer it home so that it sticks, It
sticks.
Yeah.
I mean, again, we don't have a proposition. We have a narrative, a story. Christ crucified. That is not a proposition. That is
a person.
A person in real time. It's story. And in that moment, do you think he loves us because it feels good to him? Does he love us? He's literally saying, character. Father, forgive them, for they don't know not what they do. Like, greater love has no one than this, that they lay down their life for their friends. And I just think that kind of love is so radically different than the kind of love that's in our world. And if that kind of love defined our relationships with each other, from parent to kid, kid to parent, from spouse to spouse, friend to friend, and we could love in that kind of way.
And can I just make a nerdy theological application? Like, this is actually why the doctrine of the Trinity, why it matters that God is 3 in 1 and why there are 3 persons, because need love would be the only love that God had if he was not Trinitarian, because it would mean that he created human beings because he somehow needed them to love and reciprocate the love that he gives. But if God is Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that means before the foundation of the world, before he created, there was a loving reciprocal relationship going on where they were giving and receiving love to one another before humanity was created. Yeah. So then we can find comfort that God's love is overflowing out of that relationship, and not because he seemingly needs us to be a loving creature. I know
Amen.
that's like highbrow, but this is where theology, that's
Matters.
where it matters that
Mhm.
God is not dependent on humanity to be a God of love. Like, he is love, and he's always been love, even before the creation of the world. And actually, the love that we receive is the overflowing love of that relationship that already exists. And so that brings me comfort because, it's the way
Amen.
that I can differentiate Christianity in a lot of ways from all these other world religions.
So now Carl's the vulnerable, honest one here.
Yeah.
How do we do that? You know, how do we move from being Jacob to Jesus?
You drench your heart in God. You just, and also you don't approach God, I think, with the same expectations that lead us into destruction with our earthly relationships. Like, when you don't feel love from God, that does not mean that he's absent.
Yeah. I think it's
You know
going
what
to
I'm saying?
require
Yeah.
eyes that see. First of all, ourself. We have to be exposed. Like, something that we think is love could really just be the most extreme form of selfishness and pride. And then to see in our culture how our culture celebrates this, literally through our movies, the way our culture tells stories, you know, it celebrates Jacob and that kind of love, doesn't it?
Every time.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, when you get into stories, you talk about, like, you know, Hollywood and everything with that. And it's like, so every story, or so many of them, the ones we gravitate the most to, I think, are the ones where they emulate Jesus the best, maybe without even knowing at times.
Oh, the best stories are still, all the best stories emulate.
You know, the
Jesus.
best story, obviously. The good stories emulate the best story. But
Stories of sacrifice.
yeah,
Yes, exactly.
there's loss.
Yeah.
Somebody's broken down to their
Yeah.
barest spot.
Yep.
Yeah, which, you know what those spots actually provide us? It reminds me of how Calvin opens his magnum opus, you know, like that you actually have to have the knowledge of self to know God, and to know God is to know yourself. And when we're stripped of all of those things, I think we see what's really inside of us.
Yeah.
I think that, but in the age of distraction, I think we have less and less opportunity and moments in our life where we have silence and solitude to actually reflect, what have I been doing in life? What have I been chasing? Am I even satisfied? But if we can live in a state of perpetual distraction, we can just numb ourselves from ever having to consider the implications of the life that we're living. But in a season like Jacob is having, where everything's been stripped away for him, it's actually a severe mercy of God, like you said, to say, hey, you got nothing left right now. He can self-examine. And but then here's the beautiful part of the narrative. He goes right back to some old habits.
Yeah.
In pursuing Rachel, but God remains faithful.
Anything, Carl?
Relentless.
Yeah.
He is relentless.
Yeah.
So anyway,
What do you think that there's a way to get to a place where we can feel as humans like that level of brokenness and bottom of the barrelness without being there, to humble ourselves in a place where we can really, really, you know what I'm saying? Like, can we get to,
I think that we're really, like, you got to be honest with yourself. And I think that people are scared to be honest with themselves, because when you really go there, you've got to admit there's some dark stuff. And I think you can only go there if you feel the security that that's okay, right? That's why Jesus died, right?
That sin is already forgiven.
Yeah, that's right.
It's anytime we repent, we're repenting of sin that has already been forgiven, and we already have the acceptance of God. He's the Father on the porch, just, waiting for us. But it does strike me how it's so hard for Christians to be honest.
Yeah.
For us to be honest, for me to be honest.
it's a belief issue, right? It reveals what we really believe.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well,
I think we're confused about our identity.
yeah.
I think it's an identity issue. Like the message of identity is, like we didn't do anything to earn this, and we can't really do anything to lose it, right? How can you lose something that you didn't do anything to earn? Mm-hmm. And like just the ability to grasp that, I think, is lost on so many of us.
I know. Well, because we're going to see that in the Jacob story so much. God is pursuing this guy relentlessly, as you said, Karl, irrespective of Jacob, even when he's blowing it, even when he's the most manipulative person. And he's even going to let Jacob kind of go. He's going to give Jacob over to his own stuff. You know what I mean? He's going to pursue him, but he's also going to let Jacob live into who Jacob is. And then even when God finally changes him, it's that wrestling match. And again, this is where God is just a dude who shows up as this person in the wrestling, and Jacob's actually beating him up. Think about that. God's willing to be beaten up. And it's not, but then God finally just, because Jacob, the whole time he's wrestling, is like, bless me, would you please? He's just still, all of Jacob is coming up out of him of what he wants. And his whole life he's been able to manipulate and wrestle and get the outcome that he wants. And then
but he's still not satisfied.
I know, but then God says, what is your name? What is your name? Who are you, Jacob? Again, that's a question of identity.
Exactly.
You know what Jacob says? I am Jacob, which means I am a deceiver. I suck. Seriously.
But then
that's
what's
when
the
God
end of the narrative?
Touches him and breaks him. And then he says, your name is now Israel.
But that act is what? When God's naming him, more than just giving him a name, what is God saying? I define your identity.
Yeah.
I give you an identity.
But what is God doing?
Yeah.
He's crushing him. He's breaking him.
Yeah, I don't want to get into what I'm going to be talking about on Sunday, but...
Karl, what do you have? Anything or not?
I was going to say he wounds him.
He wounds him. I know.
Yeah.
It's
like what? He does what? He hurts him?
I know. He wounds him, but then think about this. By his wounds we'll be healed.
Yeah.
So he's a wounded God, and he understands the power of wounds and how wounds bring about healing.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we need to be wounded to be redeemed.
Why?
Why? Because of our proud, guarded hearts that insist that we are God and in control of our lives, and that we can do better than God to shape and fashion an outcome.
Yeah.
And it's in some ways almost an attitude of flipping God off.
Yeah.
And God still relentlessly pursues that kind of heart. And by his grace, he breaks us, crushes us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a word in Hebrew for crushed. And I wish I had Josh Buck right now here, because Josh Buck, I don't know if you guys know him. Josh Buck was a worship pastor, started a church. When Crossroads was starting, they had their church starting. We met at Maranatha. He was leading worship. I was teaching. And we were back in the green room getting to know each other. We connected really big time. And then that Sunday, he stood up and started the whole worship gathering off with song, the Job thing. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away, and
blessed be the name.
Blessed be the name. Mm-hmm. And he said, I have not sung that song since my daughter's funeral a year ago. And then to think that after that, he finally got through that dark night of his own soul, took his wife on vacation first day, went out to the ocean and dove in and cracked his neck and was laying at the bottom of the ocean floor until someone rescued him. And he's been very open with me about this. Rod, I was the most proud, arrogant man alive, and God had to crush me, which is why he has that in Hebrew on his tattooed on his arm.
So is he quadriplegic, paraplegic now? Do you say he broke his neck?
Yeah. I mean, down to the seventh
or
or something vertebrae.
But he can't walk.
So he has little
Yeah.
movement of his arms. And no, he's been in a wheelchair.
But
since.
who else could say that unless something supernatural happened in
I
that
know.
moment?
Yeah. Shout out to you, Josh.
Yeah.
So, come on. This is Josh's story is
So
our story.
yeah. Well, and I even think about Paul's story. Paul literally says, I have a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. Why? To humble me. The Lord said, this is to humble you, to keep you from becoming conceited. So Paul, in the midst of all of his, in air quotes, ministry success, God allows this thorn with the explicit purpose of humbling Paul. I don't know.
No, I know. We should be the most humble community around. Like there's many things I think that are excusable, but being proud is inexcusable with God. We should be a humble community.
Yeah. Any last words? You have the text open there, Rod, so I'm wondering what you're putting your finger on.
It's Psalm 51, verse 8. This is that word in Hebrew. It's, let me hear joy and gladness, and let the bones that you have crushed rejoice. And that's the verse that Josh Buck goes back to. And that's David in his prayer of confession to God after his grievous sin. David could say, the bones that you've crushed me.
But on the other hand,
You've resurrected me, restored me, brought me to yourself.
Exactly.
Forgiven me, gave me a new heart, put joy in my soul.
And he's got those crushed bones. The flip side of that is, unless God crushes Jacob, his bones will rot, because Proverbs 14:30 says, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones.
Yep.
So Jacob just is envious of this relationship. He's envious of this birthright. And he'll do whatever he can to get these things. And it's rotting his bones, but God crushes his bones to resurrect those bones, to bring them to new life. And I don't know.
And it's going to be a long journey. And I felt like you, Carl, applied that. Like yours wasn't just a couple of days.
No.
It sounded like it was weeks, months.
It was years.
Years.
Yeah.
And it's going to be years for Jacob. And I think this is another thing too. We have to allow for people to be on that journey and not be like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? Oh no, they've gone so far away. Like the journey's important. At least the text is, I think, telling us that and describing Jacob's journey.
And journeying with each other as Christians.
Yeah.
I know. I think the journey of the prodigal was a long journey. Right?
Yep.
It reminds me of Job, right? When his friends come and try to point out all the things that he must have done this, he must have done this. They have no idea what's going on. Like that's really convicting, right? And trying to speak into people's lives. And
amen. There's just not, on Sunday, I saw Linda Tages, and she was, her persona was saintly to me. This pillar of saintliness. And, she's had her own journey. It's taken her a long time before her heart could come back to Crossroads, dealing with the death of Derek, our youth pastor, her son, And, we're talking many, many years. And now when I look at her and Doug, they're just pillars in our church. And they don't even know it either. And a lot of it's because of this journey, not in spite of it. And Christians, we need to allow for that journey and even the struggle, So, because what's going to come out the other side is going to just be beautiful and glorious.
Yeah. So hang on.
The sun will rise.
The sun will rise. That's our hope.
Carl, what a blast to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm the layperson here, kind of thing.
No,
you know
text
what?
is
I'm
for
going to
all
say
of us.
something right now. I'm going to say this because I did make the comment about just moving from, Western lenses to Middle Eastern lenses to look at the Bible, namely because so much of the Bible is written by Middle Easterners. And so, but I'm not smart, you know. I'm a B student. That's what I've been throughout high school, college.
I don't know what that makes me, but
and like, but I call myself a blue collar scholar. Like I just love to like learn it and mine it.
Yeah.
And I guess what am I saying here? Like people who have a title pastor are not smarter than people who don't. It's just, do you want to learn?
Mm-hmm.
And Karl, you're definitely in that category. So thank you for being here.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you for loving God, his word. Thank you for,
thanks for what you guys are doing.
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a gift.
Yeah.
Love it. It's been great getting to know you since I've been here, Karl. And
Yeah. Likewise.
I need to get some Taproot swag.
All right.
Yeah.
I can arrange that.
So, all right, appreciate yeah. This is the Locker Room, where we break down sermon stories and scripture for the race of our faith. If this podcast has been serving you, hit follow and the notification bell, and that way you'll stay up to date with all the episodes we're recording. See ya. We love you.